From the Washington Examiner, Democratic Congresswoman secretly sending staff into Mexico to coach asylum seekers. The other day, a couple days ago, Cory Booker went into Mexico to aid illegal immigrants entering the country. Strangely, we keep hearing these people referred to as asylum seekers. They're not. In almost every circumstance, the people being referred to in these stories have already been removed from the United States and are seeking to bypass the laws, thus illegal immigration. There are asylum seekers that are coming to the U.S. They come, they make their case. In many instances now they're being told to remain in Mexico. In an attempt to bypass this, many people are trying to re-enter the U.S. and change their story. In this instance, according to DC Examiner, a Democratic congresswoman is coaching them on what they need to do to not have to stay in Mexico, telling them to claim they don't understand Spanish. That's one of the rules. We also saw Cory Booker. We saw Beto O'Rourke campaigning in Mexico. We've seen sanctuary cities in general. We've seen Democrats, as of last year, warning illegal immigrants of pending ICE raids. We've seen a judge accused, now indicted, for letting illegal immigrants go from a courthouse secretly to avoid ICE. It's a really, really weird story. And I can't quite put my finger on it. Democrats are actively aiding non-citizens. Who do they represent and why are they doing this? But beyond this one story, I want to talk about something else. In Maine, where many African migrants are being sent, we see the story of a single mother being given a tent by the city. Yet, illegal immigrants are being given facilities. It's a very, very strange circumstance. When you have California giving healthcare, voting to give healthcare to illegal immigrants while they have a homeless problem. Look, I get it. We can act like the homeless of LA and the illegal immigrants are both humans deserving of human rights, but don't we have a triage system of who should be helped first? I can't say I understand why this is happening. Of course, you'll see many people on the right say that Democrats are actively aiding foreign citizens for the purpose of getting new voters. I can't really put an argument against that other than, look, I don't know why Democrats are actively aiding non-citizens. Why would someone want to elect someone who won't represent them is beyond me. But let's start with this story. And before we do, head over to timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There's a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address. But of course, the best thing you can do, share this video because YouTube won't suggest them anymore. I rely on you to suggest these videos to your friends and family on social media if you think people should listen to my content. I appreciate it. From the Examiner, a Democratic congresswoman is sending staff to Mexico's northern border town of Ciudad Juarez to find migrants returned from El Paso, Texas under the Remain in Mexico policy, then coaching them to pretend they cannot speak Spanish to exploit a loophole, letting them return to the U.S. So no, DC Examiner, these are not asylum seekers. When they go from claiming asylum, being told to wait, and then trying to commit fraud to re-enter the U.S., that is illegal immigration, right? I think that's a fair point to be made. The same can be said for what Cory Booker did. The people that Cory Booker brought in had already been deported. Now, there's very, very, very important context we need to mention when talking about asylum seekers. I'll briefly mention it now. CNN's Fareed Zakaria makes surprising comments about Trump's remarks on asylum. It pains me to say this. He is right. People are abusing the asylum system. This is more evidence of that. And lo and behold, Democrats are facilitating the fraud. Let's read on. The National Border Patrol Council's El Paso chapter and several CBP personnel told the Washington Examiner aides to Rep. Veronica Escobar, who took over 2020 Democratic presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke's district, and the local Catholic diocese have interviewed thousands of migrants in Juarez over the past few weeks to find cases where Department of Homeland Security officials may have wrongly returned people. They say, what we believe is happening is Veronica Escobar's office is going to basically second guess and obstruct work already done by the Border Patrol, said one senior unit official who shared evidence that the Washington Examiner shared evidence with the Washington Examiner from concerned CBP managers and rank and file members. Those documents have been held to protect identities. Under the bilateral MPP, the Migration Protection Protocols, or Remain in Mexico policy, anyone returned must be fluent in Spanish because they may have to reside in Mexico for up to 5 years, until a U.S. federal judge decides their asylum claim. A Democratic politician's aides re-escorting people back to the port are telling officers the Central American individual with them cannot speak Spanish despite their having communicated in it days earlier, CBP said. What we're hearing from management is that they're attempting to return people, and the story was changed in Mexico, where a person who understood Spanish before now doesn't understand, where a person who didn't have any health issues before now has health issues. If they don't speak Spanish, what are they speaking? English? What's their first language? Maybe it's English. Escobar's team has sought interviews with 6,000 people who were returned last month, according to one CBP official. The union learned from an intelligence unit within CBP that those doing the interviews are wearing recording devices during the interviews to tape conversations and possibly listen back later. They went through and interviewed everybody, cherry-picked them, brought them back, and now are using them as taglines. They're going over there and manufacturing a lot of these issues, said the union official. All three border officials worried the interviews might be used to suggest the Border Patrol is wrongfully turning away a large number of asylum seekers. We had finally found a happy medium, because we always get crapped on when it comes to immigration laws, and then they're finding loopholes to bring them back. So it sounds to me, and I could be wrong, that these people come, claim asylum, speak Spanish, are told to wait in Mexico. After these interviews come back, they secretly record the interview where the person claims they can't speak Spanish. And then when the CBP is like, no, we know this person does, they're trying to use that as evidence to claim CBP is doing something wrong. When in reality, at least according to CBP and evidence, I believe they have provided to the DC Examiner, they say, senior union official who shared evidence with the Examiner, it sounds like Democrats, at least this one Democrat, is actively assisting in immigration fraud and trying to paint CBP as the bad guys. Mark H. Metcalf, a former federal immigration judge during the Bush administration, said the involvement of Escobar's office was likely more of a stunt than a genuine threat to the integrity of the process. She's trying to obviously say these people have been wrongly denied their claims and they're waiting when they shouldn't be. However, he said a criminal case would exist if Escobar were found to be complicit in an effort to perpetrate a fraud, which would have to include knowingly injecting false statements during interviews, follow-up conversations, and documents presented to U.S. officials. They go on to say, a DHS security official aware of the situation said Democrats, nonprofit organizations, and 2020 hopefuls are furious that these migrants are not permitted to await their court dates in the U.S., where they have the opportunity to disappear and slip into the interior, never to be seen again. By opposing a system that assists migrants and speeds wait times, these individuals are exposing a cause that looks more like a cover story for their political motivations. Any effort to subvert and obstruct federal law enforcement operations should receive a full review, the official said. In one incident, an Escobar aide and diocese official walked a male migrant over the bridge in June and asked for him to be admitted into the U.S. because they had found he had cognitive disabilities. Officers took the boy and turned the case over to Border Patrol, where an agent found a constituent information and privacy release form with the U.S. House of Representatives seal on it inside the 17-year-old's file. Two officials said the paper would have to have been put in his file while he was interviewed in Mexico and was not supposed to have been left there because it would reveal to the Border Patrol that a member of Congress or their staff was meeting with migrants in Mexico. The boy has since returned to Mexico because the medical condition was not diagnosed by a medical professional, but by an aide of the Congresswoman. Management saw that Foreman was like, what is this? And reached out to our international liaison unit, and ILU said yes, Veronica Escobar and several other politicians are in Mexico trying to defeat the MPP program. Officials only discussed one port of entry in El Paso, but said they knew of 3 other incidents where Escobar's aides had walked back a Remain in Mexico program recipient. In another confirmed case, a female migrant was brought back to the port after claiming to have been raped in Juarez. The union official said the onslaught of interviews suggests federal resources are being misspent. Resources are being diverted into a foreign country in an attempt to reverse already decided legal action, meaning these people were found inadmissible under a new program and they must remain in Mexico. They're trying to subvert that. Listen, don't take my word for it. Fareed Zakaria, this story from the Daily Wire. Fareed Zakaria said, "It pains me to say this, but Trump is right." I don't know where you can stand on this when CNN says Trump is right. Trump is literally mocked as the Orange Man Bad Network. We now have the New York Times calling for Congress, give Trump the money he wants. The Democrats stepping up and saying, fine, we will give the humanitarian aid package. And even CNN caving and saying Trump is right, dealing with his remarks on asylum. And what did Trump say about asylum? That many people were exploiting the system and didn't return to their court hearings once they were left in the U.S. But let's see what Fareed Zakaria was specifically talking about. He does reference asylum abuse, but let's get into the quote. Zakaria opened the segment by noting that he is not a fan of Trump. "It pains me to say this, but he is right, that the U.S. faces a crisis with its asylum system. Democrats might hope that the out-of-control situation at the southern border undermines Trump's image among his base as a tough guy who can tackle immigration. But they should be careful. It actually could work to the president's advantage. Since 2014, the flow of asylum seekers into the United States has skyrocketed. Last year, immigration courts received 162,000 claims, a 240% increase from 2014. The result is a staggering backlog, with more than 300,000 asylum cases pending, and the average immigration case has been pending for more than 700 days. It's also clear that the rules surrounding asylum are vague, lax, and being gamed." This is incredible to hear from CNN. Seriously. "The initial step for many asylum seekers is to convince officers that they have a credible fear of persecution in their home countries. And about 75% meet that criteria. Some applicants for asylum have suspiciously similar stories using identical phrases. Many simply use the system to enter the U.S. and then melt into the shadows or gain a work permit while their application is pending." Zakaria noted that asylum is supposed to be for a very small number of people in extreme circumstances, and that the definition has become very loose over time, and that is a major factor that is contributing to the number of people flooding the U.S. border. The criteria for asylum need to be rewritten and substantially tightened. The number of courts and officials dealing with asylum must be massively expanded. People should not be able to use asylum claims as a way to work in America. There needs to be a much greater cooperation with the home countries of these applicants rather than insults, threats, and aid freezes, which is a criticism of Trump. If things continue to spiral downward and America's southern border seems out of control, Trump's tough rhetoric and hardline stance will become increasingly attractive to the public. Keep in mind that the rise of populism in the Western world is almost everywhere tied to fears of growing out of control immigration. Well, listen, I can't say whether Trump is right or wrong. I can tell you what Trump is saying versus what the Democrats are saying and what both are doing. But I can point out the sheer absurdity of sitting here to tell you that Fareed Zakaria now agrees with Trump's stance. Asylum is being abused. People suspiciously have the same story and are gaming the system. And then when we see the DC Examiner saying straight up that they have seen evidence a Democratic congresswoman is helping these people commit immigration fraud, I'm curious if there will be a criminal case here. But it sounds like it's irrefutable at this point. I do not believe Democrats have the best intentions of the American people, at least most of them. There are a few that I think are doing well, that have principles. They're not all perfect. I can say the same for many Republicans. But all you can really say after this is, you know what? We've seen it played out time and time again. Trump was not wrong. You don't have to like the man. I certainly don't, and neither does Fareed Zakaria. It is not some kind of virtue signal to say this. Many people are like, oh, Tim's simply saying he doesn't like Trump to signal to the left. No, by no means. I think Trump is crude and crass, and as I've said time and time again, represents the worst of American culture. As it pertains to the government, the New York Times released an op-ed showing that since 2012, the Republican Party has tilted slightly to the left. That includes Trump. But that doesn't mean you have to like the man. He has some very aggressive stances on some policies. His foreign policy is nearly as bad as Obama's. I actually think Obama's been worse at this point, and Trump does deserve praise for pulling back on Iran and for his meetings with North Korea. But the point is simple. You don't have to like the man, and you don't have to be a supporter of his to recognize he's been right. I do not believe anyone should truly be an overt supporter of someone unless they really do agree with everything they're doing. Okay, so I wouldn't call myself a supporter of most politicians. It is rare that I get behind somebody. But I think at this point, when you can see that even Fareed Zakaria, CNN, is willing to acknowledge Trump was correct on the issue, take a principled stance, stop screaming Orange Man bad, and recognize he was right from the get-go and something needs to be done about this. Cory Booker escorted illegal immigrants back into this country, people who had been removed under the Migrant Protection Protocols, a legal action. It is a law. It allows the government to do this. It is just a policy under an existing law. Cory Booker brought them back in. But let's move on, because I want to get to the crazy points. This story, I'm not going to read through it in its entirety. Maine single mother facing eviction has been offered a tent and camping gear by the city. Now, I believe this woman is in Bangor, and a lot of what we're seeing in terms of African migration is in Portland. I don't want to act like it's a one-for-one. It's very easy to conflate issues. Policies may be different in Bangor than they are in Portland, but I want to stress the existing problems our country faces. We have a homeless crisis, period. I can't tell you how many activists I've heard say things like, how can we have so many empty homes and so many homeless people? I agree. I think there's a challenge in that you can't just put someone who's mentally unwell or without the means to support the maintenance of a home in a home. But I do think we can pass some kind of comprehensive homelessness or housing reform package. Unfortunately, even in Los Angeles, with a Democratic supermajority, they were unable to do this. If California can't be those who we look up to from the Democrats in order, in an effort to get things done, if we can't look to the Democrats who claim to be fighting for this to solve the problem, who do we look to? And therein lies the problem we're seeing here. Democratic congresspeople, AOC giving advice on how to skirt ICE and immigration enforcement. A year ago, Oakland mayor, I believe it was the Oakland mayor, warning people that ICE raids were coming. A judge in Massachusetts indicted for helping an illegal immigrant escape ICE enforcement. Democrats actively campaigning in Mexico, like Beto O'Rourke, and Cory Booker escorting the migrants, illegal immigrants, back in. And now we have a story from the Examiner that a Democratic congresswoman is assisting in immigration fraud. Again, that's from the Examiner, who's claimed to have seen evidence. How can we have a homeless crisis? How can we tell this woman we're going to give her a tent to sleep in? Meanwhile, we have Democrats actively assisting in illegal immigration. Fareed Zakaria said it. They're gaming the system. A lot of people are. Asylum is meant for a small amount of people. It is. And I believe we have a moral obligation to protect those who truly are fearful of their life, even if they bypass Mexico. I can certainly complain that if you're fleeing Honduras and you're in Mexico, you're safe, but I still recognize perhaps Mexico may be dangerous and we can help these people. But guess what? Real asylum seekers are few and far between. Many of these people are exploiting the system, as Fareed Zakaria has said. Don't take my word for it. CNN, Orange Man Bad Network, as many people have mocked them, has said it. How can we see this story here? This is what shocks me. Comment, seriously. A Maine single mother faces eviction. She gets a tent. In Los Angeles, Portland, Seattle, there are homeless camps popping up around the country. Why is California offering to pay for universal health care for illegal immigrants? Meanwhile, they have a severe homeless crisis they haven't been able to solve. I truly don't understand what the intentions are. Now, I do want to make sure I stress some other information because my intention never is to just present things in black and white. The woman from the story is couch surfing. And we have seen that Portland area residents are lining up to host migrants from Africa. So I don't want to claim that she's in the tent. No, she's sleeping on someone's couch, but that's the best they could do for her. But we do have African migrants being given facilities and food and shelter. Meanwhile, our own citizens, single mothers, do not have this luxury. There's a few other stories that I wanted to highlight in reference to what LA is doing in response to the homeless crisis. We have this story. LA property owners, shelter residents, try to block settlement that lets homeless people keep their Skid Row belongings. It seems like over and over again, Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, We genuinely have people who claim to want to help those in need. They actually don't. If you really wanted to solve our problems, if you really cared about those who are in need, wouldn't you walk outside your own building and give a hand to the person sleeping in the streets? Why is it that they're so willing to signal to people who aren't citizens of this country? They're so willing to assist in fraud. They're so willing to actively campaign in Mexico and aid illegal immigration back to this country. How is that? But then when it comes to the actual bills to allow the homeless to even keep their property, they block this. There's no way out of this. Lack of affordable housing contributes to Los Angeles homeless crisis. Why couldn't the Democrats solve the problem? And why are so many Democrats blocking the citizenship question? Why are they blocking voter ID? Why are they assisting in illegal immigration? I can't really say. I guess a lot of Republicans will have their opinions, though. But let's wrap this up. A Democratic congresswoman secretly sending staff into Mexico to coach asylum seekers. Their stories are changing. They're claiming not to speak Spanish. Documents are emerging. And the DC Examiner says they viewed evidence that staff from this Democratic congresswoman are essentially assisting in immigration fraud. And I don't say that lightly. They go on to say that if there's evidence that she's committing fraud, a criminal case would exist if she were found to be complicit. Therein lies the issue. Was it her or was it her staff? Well, DC Examiner has taken the framing and they claim to have seen evidence. They're saying straight up, it was the Democratic congresswoman who was doing this. We'll see if any criminal charges emerge. But people are certainly calling for charges against Cory Booker for doing the exact same thing. So I'll stress one last time. The woman that Booker accompanied back in this country had already been removed legally under the Migrant Protection Protocol, and he brought them back in, providing a high-profile press and political kind of protection. I don't know what to say. All I can really end by saying is it seems like the Democrats are more interested in campaigning on the behalf of non-citizens than actual citizens. Stick around. It's about to thunderstorm. I will see you in the next segment at youtube.com/TimCastNews starting at 6 p.m.